Donald Trump is back in the White House. His victory in the 2024 presidential election sent shockwaves through the world. It was a remarkable comeback for the real estate tycoon turned reality TV star turned politician. Trump's return was fueled by a potent cocktail of economic anxiety and voter dissatisfaction. Trump's victory speech echoed the themes of his campaign. He promised to restore America's greatness and put America first. He vowed to fight for the forgotten men, women who he believed had been left behind. His words resonated with millions of Americans who felt that the American dream was slipping away. The world watched with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. Would Trump be a different president this time around? Would he be able to unite a deeply divided nation? Only time would tell. But one thing was certain. Trump's second act promised to be just as dramatic and unpredictable as his first. Trump inherits an economy grappling with the specter of inflation. While inflation had eased from its peak of 9.1% in 2022, it remained a persistent worry for American households. The rising cost of living, particularly for essentials like food and energy, had eroded the purchasing power of many Americans. The Biden-Harris administration has struggled to contain inflation. Supply chain disruptions, the war in Ukraine, and loose monetary policy had all contributed to the upward pressure on prices. While wages had risen, they hadn't kept pace with inflation, leaving many Americans feeling financially squeezed. Trump had seized upon the issue of inflation during the campaign. He blamed the Biden-Harris administration's policies for the rising cost of living. He promised to bring inflation under control and restore economic prosperity. His message resonated with voters who were feeling the pinch of higher prices. Trump's approach to taming inflation is a mix of familiar and controversial policies. Deregulation, tax cuts, and a confrontational stance on trade are all part of his economic playbook. He argues that these measures will unleash economic growth, create jobs, and ultimately bring inflation under control. Deregulation, a cornerstone of Trump's economic philosophy, aims to reduce the regulatory burden on businesses. Trump believes that excessive regulation stifles innovation and hinders economic growth. He has pledged to roll back regulations across a wide range of industries, from energy to finance to healthcare. Tax cuts are another key element of Trump's economic agenda. He believes that lower taxes will stimulate investment, boost economic activity, and put more money in the pockets of American workers. Trump has proposed a range of tax cuts, including reductions in income taxes, corporate taxes, and capital gains taxes. Trump's stance on trade is perhaps the most contentious aspect of his economic policy. He has long been a critic of free trade agreements, arguing that they have cost American jobs and hurt American businesses. Trump has promised to renegotiate or withdraw from existing trade agreements and to impose tariffs on goods from countries he deems to be unfair traders. Trump wasted no time in putting his stamp on economic policy. In his first days in office, he signed a flurry of executive orders aimed at reversing key policies of the Biden-Harris administration and setting the stage for his own economic agenda. One of Trump's first acts was to revoke permits for the Keystone XL pipeline, a project that he had championed during his first term. The pipeline, which would transport oil from Canada to the United States, had been blocked by the Biden-Harris administration on environmental grounds. Trump argued that the pipeline would create jobs and reduce American dependence on foreign oil. Trump also moved quickly to dismantle regulations that he argued were hindering economic growth. He issued executive orders aimed at rolling back regulations in the energy, financial, and healthcare sectors. These actions were met with praise from business groups and criticism from environmental and consumer advocates. Trump's early actions sent a clear signal that he intended to pursue an aggressive economic agenda. His supporters cheered his decisive action, while his critics warned that his policies would benefit the wealthy at the expense of the poor and damage the environment. Section 5. Deregulation. Fueling the engine or fanning the flames. Trump's deregulation drive is a central pillar of his plan to combat inflation. By reducing the regulatory burden on businesses, he aims to unleash economic growth and increase productivity, theoretically leading to lower prices. However, critics argue that deregulation could have the opposite effect, potentially fueling inflation. Proponents of deregulation argue that it will boost investment and innovation. With fewer regulations to navigate, businesses will be more likely to invest in new projects, expand their operations, and create jobs. This increased economic activity, they argue, will lead to greater competition, which in turn will help to keep prices in check. However, opponents of deregulation warn that it could lead to higher prices for consumers. They argue that regulations are essential for protecting consumers from harmful products and services, ensuring fair competition in the marketplace, and safeguarding the environment. Rolling back these regulations, they contend, could lead to monopolies, lower quality goods, and environmental damage, all of which could contribute to inflation. Section 6. Tax cuts. A tried and tested tool. Tax cuts are a familiar refrain in the Trumpian economic orchestra. He argues that reducing taxes, particularly for businesses and high earners, will stimulate investment, boost economic growth, and ultimately benefit all Americans. But the effectiveness of tax cuts in curbing inflation remains a subject of intense debate. Advocates of tax cuts argue that they put more money in the pockets of consumers and businesses. When people have more disposable income, they tend to spend more, which stimulates demand and drives economic growth. Businesses, in turn, respond to this increased demand by investing in new capacity, hiring more workers, and raising wages. This virtuous cycle, they contend, can help to keep inflation in check. However, critics of tax cuts argue that they primarily benefit the wealthy and do little to boost economic growth or curb inflation. They point out that tax cuts often lead to higher budget deficits, which can put upward pressure on interest rates. Higher interest rates, in turn, can make it more expensive for businesses to invest and for consumers to borrow money, potentially dampening economic activity. Section 7. Tariffs and Trade Wars. A risky gamble. Trump's penchant for tariffs and his willingness to engage in trade wars have added another layer of complexity to the inflation puzzle. While he argues that tariffs are necessary to protect American jobs and businesses from unfair foreign competition, economists warn that they could backfire, leading to higher prices for consumers and retaliation from trading partners. Trump's tariffs on goods from China, Mexico, and other countries have raised prices for consumers and businesses. The tariffs have increased the cost of imported goods, forcing businesses to either absorb the higher costs or pass them on to consumers in the form of higher prices. This in turn has contributed to inflation. Moreover, Trump's tariffs have sparked retaliation from trading partners. China, Mexico, the European Union, and other countries have imposed retaliatory tariffs on billions of dollars worth of American goods. These retaliatory tariffs have hurt American businesses, particularly farmers and manufacturers who rely on export markets. Section 8. Expert Opinions. A Divided House. The potential impact of Trump's economic policies on inflation has divided economists. Some experts believe that his policies will succeed in taming inflation and usher in a new era of economic prosperity. Others fear that his policies will backfire, leading to higher inflation, slower economic growth, and increased inequality. Supporters of Trump's economic agenda argue that his policies will unleash economic growth, create jobs, and ultimately bring inflation under control. They point to the experience of the 1980s, when President Ronald Reagan's policies of deregulation, tax cuts, and tight monetary policy helped to tame inflation and usher in a period of sustained economic growth. However, critics of Trump's economic policies argue that they are likely to exacerbate inflation, increase the budget deficit, and benefit the wealthy at the expense of the poor and the middle class. They point out that the economic conditions today are different from those of the 1980s, and that Trump's policies are likely to have different results. Section 9, January 6, 2025. A new era begins. January 6, 2025 will forever be etched in the annals of American history. 2 years after the tumultuous events of January 6, 2021, when a mob of Trump supporters stormed the U.S. Capitol in an attempt to prevent the certification of Joe Biden's electoral victory, the date took on a new significance. It marked the beginning of Trump's second act as president, a moment fraught with uncertainty and anticipation. The world watched as Trump took the oath of office for the second time. His inauguration speech was a far cry from the conciliatory tone he had struck in his victory speech. Instead, he delivered a fiery address, railing against his political opponents, the media, and the so-called deep state that he believed was out to get him. Trump's return to power has left many wondering what the future holds for America. Will he be a different president this time around? Will he be able to unite a deeply divided nation? Only time will tell. But one thing is certain: Trump's second presidency will be anything but boring.